Farmers today are facing rising costs, volatile markets, and extreme weather. The Better Way to Farm podcast digs into strategies to help you take control of farm inputs and maximize profit so your farm can thrive for generations. Remember to take advantage of our free resources at abetterwaytofarm.com. Now, from America's Heartland, here's your host. Welcome back to the Better Way to Farm podcast. I'm your gracious host, Tyler, National Field Advisor on the team. If you're looking to increase your yield and increase profitability, you're in the right place. Now, I'm super excited. On today's episode, we snagged a good one. A grower from Northeast Ohio that is very new to our team, not only as a client, but also has decided to make the commitment to join us on the consulting side and is growing a very successful off-farm income. That's something that we talk about a lot. Not only do we work with growers on their profitability, but we always provide the opportunity to someone is interested to join us on the consulting side. I say it all the time. That's how I started. That's what I'm doing here. And it's always fun to meet new growers and to work with new people. So if you would help me welcome my very good friend, Mr. Jason. Jason, thank you very much for joining us today. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me. Excited to chat with you.
I know I did a phenomenal job introducing you, but if if you would want to just tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you're from, and what you farm, we'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. So my name is Jason Fink. I'm from Northeast Ohio. We're about 5 miles from Lake Erie, and that does tend to affect our weather quite a bit. Or we tend to get a lot of rain. So like it's the end of April, we're probably still a week or two away from planting.
So what types of crop are you farming up there? What does that operation look like?
So I'm a pretty small operation. I've only been farming for 6 or 7 years. I grow corn, soybeans, mainly corn and soybeans, and then a little bit of wheat. I started off working with our co-op and getting stuff from recommendations from them, so to say, and just really not getting great recommendations. And the biggest problem I had with them was just they didn't really have anything to tell you. Hey, what about this? Well, we really don't know, and it's like, you ask them about what you should put down, and there just really wasn't a lot of information. So I kind of started down a journey probably 3 or 4 years ago to try to really learn as much as I could
Yep.
and to kind of get as much agronomy information for myself as I could. So, as far as for me reaching out to a better way to farm, my story is probably a little different than most. I was actually wanting to go towards liquid products, and I was looking for a liquid potassium product, and I called Rod and asked him about that, and he talked about how we have a system that is a full liquid system, and that really piqued my interest. I was really that really interested me. I was wanting to try to get away from dry, with the amount of salt that is in dry, and what that does to our soil, making it tight and making things not available and tying up a lot of stuff in the soil. So the liquid system is really what interested me when I reached out.
So I want to take you back to 6 to 7 years ago. What made you decide that you wanted to start farming? As probably even, I mean, it's always a difficult decision, one that I never ended up making. I came from a very small. My grandpa had the farming operation. I had an SAE project for FFA, and I was in 4-H and stuff, but I never, I knew that the 100 tillable acres was not going to be enough to go back, to the family farm. And so for you, what was that kind of that deciding or that driving factor that you said, you know what, I'm going to commit to this farming thing, and I'm going to try to get this thing to go?
So yeah, my dad was raised around 200 acres of hay. When I was a kid growing up, and he always worked a full-time job too. And just was always tough. Trying to make things happen, trying to do it on with older equipment and smaller stuff. But he definitely made it happen. And so I went to school to be a welder. I went to a vocational school, became a welder by trade, and I did that for I don't know, quite a few years. I did a few other things in life as well, ran a couple businesses. one of the things I would do, I have a neighbor of mine, he's about 30 minutes west of me. I'd go out there and I'd help him farm. He row crops about 1,500 acres, and I'd go run some tractors for him and stuff like that. And obviously, he had nicer, newer equipment, so that did make it a little more fun. But I just really enjoyed going out there and doing that, and especially on the row crop side. So I
Hmm.
was kind of transitioning out of a business, and I just decided that I was going to start farming. And, probably a lot of people think I was crazy and still probably do. But, 6, 7 years later, we're still here and doing it. It's not been
Yes.
easy. I've had to do a lot of other things. I've done a lot of dirt work. I've done a lot of wrenching, mechanic work to be able to get by to try to grow this from, almost nothing to where I'm at. My dad had some tractors and some equipment to be able to get started and help me out. And he still does the hay, and he's actually getting into doing some row crops now as well.
That's
And
awesome.
he does, yeah, and he does help me with that. But for the most part, I do my operations all my own, and I'm going to have right around 600 acres this year. So
That's awesome,
not a
man.
ton of acres, but yeah, not a ton of acres, but definitely enough to keep me busy.
Yeah, no kidding. Absolutely. So, nowadays it's very nice that technology allows us to search things. I have to be careful because the problem is, when you're looking up, how to farm, are there better ways of doing things? My fertility program, I feel like it's not complete. So what are there other things to do? Dude, you can go down a rabbit hole so fast and find a bunch of different garbage out there. And then you have to sift through what's right and what's wrong. And that's one of the things that I am adamant about. Again, I like to stand on my soapbox with this platform because I get to, and I haven't been told to not to. So, to me, that's why I'm here because I'm an independent agronomist. That's my education, that's my background. Unfortunately, I don't farm. I would love to own some farm ground one day and kind of go from there. But to me, being an independent agronomist and making sure that the recommendations that I provide are not only those that are beneficial to the grower, but also to the plant health, soil health, increased profitability, generally it increases yield, all of that. And so, how difficult was it when you were kind of looking and searching? I know that you kind of decided that the liquid side was going to be your friend. Dude, you start looking up liquid fertility, you're going to find options for days. How are you able to kind of sort through that? And what really drew you to a better way to farm?
I tried some products prior to working with us, and for the price and for what you get, really, there just was not a good ROI on it. It just was not a good product in the end, and it is hard to really tell what is good and what is not. One thing I really like about working with a better way to farm is we're really big on ROI. We're not talking pennies, we there needs to be a decent ROI for it to make sense for us.
Yep.
And just when I first started talking to Rod and starting down this path, I liked everything I heard. The high quality products, no salt, and as we'll probably talk about, we feel like that translates to better plants and then ultimately to yield.
Yeah.
And that was one thing the first year I used the full liquid system, which was last year. That was one of the biggest things I noticed was the plant health. They looked much healthier. You could
Yeah.
see it in the field.
Yeah.
It definitely stood out and was different from years prior.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up the quality, and I absolutely love that because I took two phone calls earlier this week. One of the guys is one of my personal clients. They're retrofitting their planter and kind of doing some upgrades, and he called me and he said, "Hey, my guy is trying to sell me a pump, but he's trying to sell me an upgraded pump or something like that because the other one that we were going to buy, it just doesn't handle fertilizer really well." He said that you basically, because of the fertilizer is so there's so much salt in it that it'll eat up a pump every year. And I started laughing. I said, that's interesting you say that because we have growers. Preston is probably even on this platform talked about how he winterizes his sprayer and his planter with our fertilizer because it won't rust any of your equipment. And then I was talking to my buddy Sam. You know Sam. I was just talking to him last night. One of his customers that's up in your neck of the woods started to get his fertilizer in. He did order some micros from us as well, but he had some left over. And so he was starting to mix his micros that he had in with our starter. And he called Sam. Luckily, thankfully, he did a jar test and he called Sam and he goes, "Hey, these micros aren't mixing with this fertilizer. What's going on?" And Sam's like, "Well, what are you talking about?" And he's like, "Well, I had some other competitive products and I'm trying to mix them in the starter and I'm just doing little, jar tests just to see." And he's like, "As soon as I put in the micros, the whole thing just clouds up and falls out." And Sam's like, "Yeah, that's not what we do." He's like, "Do you have any of our stuff?" And he's like, "Yeah, but I haven't, opened it yet." He's like, "But I'm a little leery now." And Sam goes, "All right, this is what I'm going to do." He's like, "I have a custom blend that's already built. It's got some of the same micros that you have. They're already in it. I'm just going to go grab a sample and I'll show you." So Sam goes out to his tank that he got custom blend, zinc, manganese, whatever micro was in it, pulls it out. Obviously, Jason, you know how clear and how clean it is.
Hmm.
Looks just like water, pulls it out and says, "Yeah, this is the picture and this is the analysis." And the guy was like, "There's no way, that doesn't look anything like what I've got here." And he's like, "Yeah, that's the difference between us and the competitors. Like that's why you can't take a piece of our system and try to duplicate it yourself. It just does not work." And now that you're on the consulting side, you're probably starting to run into that as well, that some of these people are like, I can source my own, micro, or I can source my own something and make this thing cheaper. And that's not what we're here for. We're here for the education. We're here to make sure, like you talked about, that our products are not only increasing yield, but they're making you more profit, that your ROI is increasing. So, what has been your biggest takeaway in this last year or so that you've been working with us? Where have you seen education side, the agronomy side of things that you've learned in the last, say, 12 to 24 months? What does that look like compared to, the last 6, 7 years?
Well, yeah, that's a great question, Tyler. So probably, prior to working with a better way to farm, I had found tons of information. I mean, just loads and loads. But again, we talked about a little earlier, trying to sift through all of it and find stuff that is good. I mean, if you had 100% of your stuff you were looking at, 5 or 10% of it might be decent information.
Yep.
And so one thing that's really nice with working with a better way to farm is, I mean, just tons of really, really good information, and it's backed by test. Rod has tons of experience. We talk about the thousands of test plots he's done from Minnesota to Texas, Nebraska to Pennsylvania. There's just tons of knowledge and experience behind the information we have. It's tried, it's true, and it's been tested.
I think you personally work with Chris, don't you? I
Yes.
think.
Yep.
Yeah. So Chris, granted, he's, lives very close to Rod and their family, very close with them, but Chris farms as well, right? Like
Hmm.
that's where most of the clients that we work with, that's how this thing started, is that they're like, "Okay, yep, this is something different. Yep, now I'm getting a return and now my neighbors are seeing what's going on and they're asking me questions." It's like, "Yeah, dude, all you got to do is invite them to the next meeting, have them jump in the truck and come check out what we do, because what we do is it's not magic. It's all based off of science. There's nothing that we do that we can't explain." And I say that because there are some things I don't consider myself a hippie, but I absolutely believe in plant health and soil health, and that there are things that we are doing to our environment that are not healthy. There is no reason why we should be putting or applying some of these fertilizers on the soil. Honestly, if we could get away from using synthetic fertilizer, that would be fantastic. I don't see how we're going to raise the yields that we need to raise without synthetic fertilizer. But if we are going to use synthetic fertilizer, then why don't we use the best? And why don't we understand the things that we're putting on our soil? And then on top of that, Let's have proof that it works. And that's why I struggle with these companies that are selling, bugs in a jug and some of those other things that are kind of in theory make sense, but are hard to explain, especially on a label. And to me, that's where we land is like, look, we're the majority of the growers that we work with are just like you, Jason, that say, you know what, I'm just looking for a better way. Yeah, there are some other things, once you join us and you come down our path, maybe there is something else that you can add to this system, but this system is pretty stout. What has our system, what have we been able to do with your operation since you've joined us, since you've went to the 2-day fundamentals of agronomy, you've learned about what we do. Kind of take us through that transition.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So again, like I mentioned earlier, one of the biggest things that for as far as seeing is the plant health, how much better the crop looks. I've been working, my yields are not super, not they're not pause. My yields are not super high. I farm a lot of ground that was scrub brush, old pastures that doesn't have a lot of available nutrients, and that's why we do the things we do to try to make the nutrients available. But anyways, in the last 3 or 4 years, I've probably added 2, 3 bushel to my corn yield every year. But this year, this past year, 2024, I think I probably added to my average about maybe 28, 29 bushel, which was pretty incredible and pretty awesome.
Yes. I mean, it pays the bills, right?
Yeah, yeah, it definitely helps, especially in a year where inputs were really high and commodity prices were really low.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, if I hadn't have done our system, I don't know where I'd be at because there was a lot of guys who had cost per bushel over the cost of corn, and I was able to have mine below that, and that definitely made a big difference in my operation last year.
Do you happen to know your cost per bushel off the top of your head or?
It was right around 350 a bushel.
Okay.
And then, the goal is this year I hope to put another 15 to 20 bushel on my average and even keep lowering that. And one thing that's nice about going to the fundamentals of agronomy and learning all the agronomy information I have is I can understand and have a path to be able to get there.
Yep.
I'm not just sitting here going, well, I want to put 20 bushel on my corn crop. There's things I can do to be able to achieve that.
Right. And to me, that is huge. That has been such a topic of conversation, especially this last month. It has been crazy to me, and I know that you're feeling
Hmm.
this on the sales side. The amount of growers that are still trying to line up, that basically they're operating out their line of credit for 2025 because of that. And it's so wild to me to hear the stories just like yourself. Sam's got a story, my buddy Tyler's got a story, Chris has a story that when our clients, when you guys walk into the bank and you talk to the banker, they're like, man, it's tough out there. Inputs were high, commodity prices are low, yield was off just a tick. And it's like, yeah, man, it's bad, it's bad, it's bad. 2025 is going to be tough. Like, well, what am I going to do with, how am I looking? And then all you guys come back is like, what? The banker's like, oh, no, 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 you guys are fantastic. Like, you guys are increasing yield. You guys are making money. Like, yeah, well, whatever you need, we'll loan you the cash for whatever. It's wild to hear those stories that the banker's like, man, it's tough, it's tough. And then you're like, okay, well then what about me? And then they're like, oh no, you're cool. It's
Hmm.
it's absolutely insane. Jason, what does your operation look like now, and where would it be if you hadn't reached out to Rod that day?
I don't know, Tyler, especially with where input costs were last year and, the cost that what we were getting paid for commodities the last fall. I truly don't know, I mean, I think there was one time I told my wife, I said, man, if I really can't make this work, I don't know if we'll be able to keep doing it. I don't have the 30, 40, 50 years of generational, I'm not going to say wealth or money, but I don't have the equity built to be able to withstand some of these tough years.
Yep.
Somebody like me, they just don't make it.
Yep.
So yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, I can really appreciate that, and like I said, man, I love the new growers that are working with us that come on, and we can keep their farming operation alive, and then you hear the stories of Sam, that's sixth generation trying to raise seven generation, and we're keeping those operations alive as well.
Yeah.
I absolutely love
Hmm.
what we do, and as we wrap this episode up. Jason, do you have any kind of last advice for that listener that is tuning in today? What advice do you have for that grower?
Yeah, I just tell them, reach out, don't wait another day. We're changing people's lives. We're changing people's, farms and the trajectory of them. Just making a huge difference in people's lives. Kind of talking about the fundamentals of agronomy. I personally heard a couple guys who have 4-year ag degrees say, and probably in a little jest, but that they learn more in our 2-day fundamentals of agronomy. There's just a ton of really, really good information that you're going to be hard pressed to really learn anywhere else.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. I am one of those that was reluctant because of my experience and my education. I said to Preston, I'm like, man, I don't know why I need to go to that 2-day ag meeting. I've been to ag meetings, my entire life. That's all I've ever done, as a retail agronomist, a CDSM. I got my education from Iowa State. Like well, there's nothing that you're going to teach me that I'm going to learn more. And then you go there, and to me, I'll be honest with you, there was some refresher. Listening to Denny, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that, but I've never put it into practice. That makes a lot of sense. And then he would say some stuff, and you're like,
Hmm.
holy smokes, I have never heard that before. And we've been talking about it. I mean, I've been helping out. That was 10 years ago. I've been helping giving these presentations now for the last 5. So the information is absolutely phenomenal. We do add to it, but man, it's just backed by solid science. And so yeah, Jason, I thank you very much for that advice. That's phenomenal. I really, really appreciate your time, my friend. It was great chatting with you. I look forward to seeing you. I know I'm going to be seeing you
Yeah.
soon. And so you take care of yourself.
Yeah. Thanks, Tyler. Thanks for having me on. It was great.
And I want to thank all you listeners for tuning in to the A Better Way to Farm podcast. As always, we hope that you have a better day.